already there before he was elected. The discourse talking about why establishment itself is bad, why the law enforcement, the media, the judicial system, the political news channels, all are part of the establishment, part of a deep state of something that is against the people, that is actually lying to the people consistently in every way they're possible. With the motto of draining the swamp and the deep state, this discourse has been very, very dominant in the Europe, in the United States, harms democracy and harms any new positive change that we want to achieve. Firstly, on account of framing, I think it's very clear what we're talking about. I think that Donald Trump is a good explanation, but we think that QAnon, anything talking about deep state, about how the establishment is bad, is in line consistently, is part of the anti-establishment belief. Two arguments in my speech. Firstly, what that anti-establishment encourage and how we prevent it. Secondly, how we cause how this motive causes less political cooperation. Let's start. Firstly, why did it happen? We think that firstly it happens because of the internet. Conspiracy theories that aren't used by mainstream media, but are now used through Fortune and other news media. Even if Facebook blocks it, it's really easy to access other things that just don't block it. And many times Facebook, etc., did not block it. Secondly, in terms of echo chamber, you can see only your own opinion, and the algorithm have an incentive to show you only your own opinion. Yes, there is some echo chamber on both sides, but in your neighborhood, you are less likely to be all holding together a conspiracy theory. Your family and your friends are many times talking about other things, even if they are still right-wing, they have different opinions, etc., but you're not in a forum where everyone tells you how right you are, and who is more extreme gets more attention. Secondly, in terms of media, we think that Rupert Murdoch, etc., have more control and have incentive exactly to push that. Why mostly this is right-wing extremist anti-establishment? Firstly, anti-establishment people are people who are more harmed by the establishment many times, people with less education many times, we think that are more prone to be right-wing. Secondly, many times business people have an incentive to push that, because they say that taxes is theft, because they say, I'm not wrong, it's okay to do that, because they want someone in the inside that people say is anti-establishment, I don't care if he's corrupt or not, in order to promote their ideas. That's to say that the most of the media that is owned by business people also pushes. Even of conspiracy theories, now they push conspiracy theories because they were pushed before by Fortune, but also. Thirdly, in terms of right-wing is inherently just more democratic in its values, and now it tries to push them. So it's less likely to actually promote these things inherently. Lastly, we think that when minorities many times just need the establishment, the leftist establishment, in order to promote themselves. Why? Because they are oppressed, etc. They cannot move their own many times protest, and they need the leftist establishment, which means that they cannot be so anti-establishment as in the other side. All in all, that means that mostly with right-wing extremists. What would happen? Firstly, we think that Trump really wouldn't happen on our side. Why? Specifically, when talking about how Trump succeeded, we're talking about how strong he was on Twitter, how Pizzagate, etc., conspiracy theories were important, how corrupt Hillary says, the sense of how corrupt everything was, not just Hillary, but how the whole State Department and the whole Obama thing was corrupt in its root. This is exactly the anti-establishment narrative that promoted things. We don't think that Trump is an excellent example. We think that, for example, other world, Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, when we're talking about Marine Le Pen in France, when we're talking about the AfD in Germany, all these right-wing extremists, even if they don't become leader, are hugely bad. They are bad, firstly, in terms of minorities. The harm to immigrants, for example, that Trump did, literally millions of people pushed away, if that's post-Johnson, pushing them to Uganda, and literally dying there. Many times, the rights of other people, but moreover, we think that it just causes much more extremism and not any way to handle anything, because just talk anti-establishment, as literally millions of people dying in the US because Trump didn't care about COVID, and people said, the establishment lies about COVID, which is so bad in and of itself. Let's talk about less political cooperation. Before that, I will get OO. CO.
You can't seriously claim that Trump became president only because the anti-establishment. It is only a small part. Talk about Me Too, Black Lives Matter, all of the minorities and the left to go anti-establishment, make it a serious debate.
What? Me Too? Like Me Too says, look, there is specifically a problem that we protect men. It didn't say, look, we need to actually collapse Hollywood because Hollywood is in itself something bad. But moreover, we explained why systematically we're talking more about right-wing movements. Yeah, we think that it's just mostly not on the debate. I'll explain that more. Let's talk about less political cooperation. Firstly, our representatives have less incentive to cooperate. First reason, they seem to be hypocritical if they cooperate with with the other side because they run on anti-establishment platform that says they are all corrupt. Secondly, it's harder to criticize. It's hard to criticize the establishment when you work with it. Thirdly, it's easier to show that you prove how the establishment is bad when you say, look, any law I passed, they didn't want to work with me, they hated me, they just are part of the deep state. You have an incentive literally not to work for them, bring laws that aren't passed, etc. What it means. Firstly, you're less likely to pass any law together or pass anything of any significance. Secondly, in terms of committees, we've seen that many times part of the parliament is actually to get into what the police does, what any law enforcement does. Is the military actually doing things that are legal and are moral? Many times you just don't care about it, and your voters don't care because they say it's all one big shame that you need to actually cancel all in together. So you just know to actually get into and scrutinize it. Thirdly, you're likely to prevent many times appointments. For example, literally in the United States, the ability of Joe Biden to pass any new appointments, like the new Secretary of Education, depends on the Republican. A huge anti-establishment narrative means that literally you have no acting secretary. In terms of impact, literally no ability to continue your policies because you don't know that, and you can't depend on any ideology other than saying that you don't care for that. It means that, first in terms of democracy, these literally have an incentive not to push their own agenda, but rather be against any agenda that is not an anti-establishment agenda. That is to say that the majority doesn't matter anymore because the representative has incentive to just prevent anything. So in general, the country cannot continue forward. When we talk about privacy laws, when we talk about laws for detainees, for minorities, for carry, when we talk about police, any police reform, it can't be done when the incentive of representative, and yes, also left-wing representative as AOC, for example, is to say, look, this is all a shame, this is a deep state and cannot happen. This discourse pushes it because they want to show how anti-establishment is, how the establishment is bad, and the way to show that is that change isn't possible through establishment. I call you to propose.
Thank the speaker for that speech. To open case aside opposition, leader of opposition. Here.
Hello, am I audible and visible?
Yes, all good.
Okay, great. For BOIs, do so through voice at the 5th minute. Again, voice at the 5th minute. I'm not going to check chat. I'm not seeing chat. So if you do it through chat, I'm not going to see it. Again, BOIs through voice at the 5th minute. Great. Starting my speech, hold on, oops, forgot my voice recording. Starting my speech in three, 2, 1. Understand that this debate is an assessment of what type of discourse ought to prevail. Note that the motion talks about the rise, not necessarily regretting or completely supporting anti-establishment. The ways that we're going to discuss about this is firstly on the metric of impacts in terms of the extent of benefit and harm, who exactly is affected by this rise of discourse or by the popularization of this type of narrative. But secondly, in terms of who is receiving the messaging, what is the marginal change within their behavior and why it's ultimately preferable on our side. Before I get into my constructives, just a few clarifications and responses. Firstly, I just want to note that anti-establishment as a narrative is not a conspiracy theory. I'm going to discuss this more in my constructives, but let's just deal with OG. At best, OG argues that it encourages people to opt into things like conspiracy theories. Understand that firstly, it's an externality from it. It's unclear to which extent of this anti-establishment narrative encourages it. panel, I think you have to fault OG regarding that logical link, that missing logical link. But secondly, I think that people who are vulnerable to conspiracy theories will always exist, will always be like conspiracy theorists. It's unnecessarily sure why that will change on opening government when we ultimately oppose the rise, or why specifically this dominant narrative or this rise is ultimately the cause of why people are so vulnerable to conspiracy theories in the first place. But lastly, even if it does affect like people's conspiracy theories within society, I think it is the solution to its own problem. Anti-establishment as a narrative is about questioning the status quo, the dominant narrative that controls our politics and our ideals. We make people believe that we need to challenge the dominant narrative or the people who are already existent in power. It just becomes an easier game to convince them who's just in power in the first place. It's easier to convince people that Trump is the establishment and his media versus telling people not to be angry with the current way of politics. Let's get on then to my constructives. First, on the comparative as for why exactly we'd prefer the rise of anti-establishment. Understand, and this is where we're going to challenge the definition coming from OG. Anti-establishment is not a conspiracy theory, but rather it's the idea of being against the candidates and politicians that continuously run again, whether they're from political dynasties or just someone who's politically established within a society. It's ultimately a counter-narrative that there's a response towards the dominance of already established actors within society, comes from people's dissatisfaction with how the system has not yet changed, and ends up attributing to such lack of change due to the lack of change in leadership and ideals. But it also means to combat political apathy insofar as the trends, insofar as all the problems in society are still prevalent. The reason why there's no marginal change or nothing being done is because we continue to opt into political actors that only stay within the niche with their platforms, or that continue implementing policies that they are comfortable with and existent within their own parties. This looks like saying that Mitch McConnell is not someone that we vote for. He's not the best option. It looks like the Eusebio family should not be running or should not be voted into power anymore. It looks like associating that the reason why problems such as high tax rates, the disparity between the rich and poor, or the lack of infrastructure development within your own states and towns are ultimately attributed to these political actors and to these politicians who refuse to change or who still haven't addressed these problems in society. Why is this a fairer frame than OG's, right? OG completely assumes that anti-establishment is equivalent to anarchy, where we don't want order. If that were the case, then obviously that forces opposition bench to defend a world where we'd rather have people be super violent or debunk established democracies and governments. Note that A, it makes it a selfish debate that it makes it difficult for opposition to engage, but B, I think the WUDC manual already presupposes that both sides operate in a functional society unless explicitly noted in the info side or motion. I don't think Ajkar would set a debate where teams have to defend us subverting an entire government or promoting anarchy per se. Before I get on, sure, what's the POI?
Yeah, I don't understand what's the difference between anti-establishment discourse and just criticism in general. I think criticism still exists in Gulf. Why it's different?
Understand, this is where we talk about the rise, right? The rise propagates this narrative to be something desirable insofar it's considered trendy, it's considered to be the ideal, or other convincing, or other moderates and voters to think about other candidates and other choices and alternatives. The difference between criticism and the discussion about anti-establishment is that criticism merely just focuses that these are all the flaws. Anti-establishment, on the other hand, goes the extra mile, where it's not just the flaws that you're pointing out, it's also attributing all these problems, all these social problems towards certain political candidates continuously being in power, essentially understanding that it is the establishment's fault, the system in and of itself, that continues perpetrating these problems, that continues not fixing these problems. Note that what does this mean on our side, right? I think that on our side, we are likely to propagate other things like other choices, other candidates, and other alternatives. It looks like promoting grassroots political candidates such as Lucas Spiritu or Vico Soto in the Philippine elections and opting into them because they do not necessarily come from political dynasties, but secondly, are not necessarily politically known as a candidate because they are not attached to themselves in a position of power in government. Note that this doesn't mean that we cannot necessarily check what their track records are. We can still understand the background of these candidates and their campaigns. The focus on an anti-establishment narrative is that we look into it as voters, that we try to encourage with the rise in looking taking into its nuance the difference of value that these candidates provides in comparison to already established actors or already established politicians that are already running or rerunning again for re-elections. This therefore creates accessibility to other candidates and other ideas insofar as the type of discourse that you get is not necessarily on a tunnel vision where you only vote for that one popular candidate or for those between those two popular candidates who have historically been established or known. It looks like discussing to voters on the ground that they don't need to necessarily make a choice just between Trump or Biden alone. There are other candidates that they consider, such as Andrew Yang, and then pump in the different policies he's integrating to his campaign. Why exactly is this important, and why is it bad when you ultimately oppose this type of rights? It means that you do not have an active counter narrative towards the people who are stuck in echo chambers, who are left with the decision that the only candidates that they can vote for are literally just Trump or Biden. They can only vote for political candidates that are supposedly popular, right? Secondly, I think this means that you are less likely to counter political apathy, and this is where I discuss extensively about criticism, right? I think a lot of people end up politically apathetic, not necessarily because they aren't engaged with politics, but because they have no incentive to understand or to believe that other people are going to fix the system. Because historically, the people who get into power never necessarily change towards the extent where benefits such as poverty or unemployment are going to be things that are solved. I think this ultimately means that when you have an anti-establishment narrative, when you have the rise and popularization of it, you actively tell people that the reason why problems exist in status quo is not necessarily because they just exist out of nowhere, but because it is continuously perpetuated by these already established authorities or these established politicians. Ultimately, on our side, we say that we give people better choices, but secondly, we also place accountability to these politicians. For all these reasons, we're very proud to oppose. Thanks.
Thank the speaker for that speech. To continue case for side government, Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Give me a second to run my pages. Okay, so I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. 2 points in my case. A, I will explain why the likely scenario of anti-establishment in our days is far-right populism. And second, I will explain why we have under this motion a threat to democracy, as we see in many states like Turkey and Hungary, a gradual backsliding in democracy. Just one external rebuttal. We hear the analysis that says that the establishment is problematic. By no means we ever claim that the establishment is perfect. We think that we know that there are some problems, but also look all the good things that happen within the establishment. In the last 50 years, we get in the United States black people and white people riding the same buses without getting violent. We get more representation of women in parliament. We think that these gradual changes happen, and we get no analysis why it will stop happening in the future. We think that it's inherent part of democracy. When people get to voice their opinion, then we gradually becoming better. But even if you think that we won't get better in the future, I just want to note that I will take the problematic and the problematic democracy of the United States, for example, under George Bush or Barack Obama, rather than Trump on any day. They never gave you any analysis why the situation is not getting worse. So even if you think that the establishment sucks, we think that it sucks less
yes on our side, and that's enough for us to win openly in a position. Let's talk about the difference between protest and anti-establishment, which is my first case about why we think this specifically anti-establishment organization are far-right populism. We get from CO the PY that says, look, Me Too is part of the debate. So we strongly disagree with that. Why? We think that we need to understand we think that every individual and every movement that want to change something in reality have some kind of criticism against the establishment. For example, when I say my government doesn't pay enough money for the poor or don't protect enough women, it doesn't make me an anti-establishment person. It just makes me a regular citizen in democracy that voice an opinion and sometimes have criticism. What is specific to anti-establishment is the idea that everything in the establishment is rotten to its core, and it's something that you cannot change unless you bend to the ground all what you got for now. It's also the idea that a moderate politician, whether it's right wing or left wing, for example, Mitt Romney, are just puppet of the deep state, because the establishment and the deep state is not just the politicians themselves, but also the judicial system, the police, and some business owners that are that pay them for lobbyism and things like that. All right. So we think that when Me Too says, look, the establishment, we want a democracy, but within this democracy, we want more power to women. We want more women legislator, and we want more protection against rape and sexual harassment. They are not anti-establishment. They are just saying the establishment is good, but it should have some adjustment. We think that when you are climbing on the Capitol because you heard on Twitter that Trump told you to do that because the system is rigged, the election is rigged, the bureaucrats rigged it for the Democrats, that's anti-establishment. And we get what we get from O. We get A, that it's unfair to make them protect Trump. We are really sorry that this is the reality that we live in. I would be very happy to debate another reality in a parallel universe, but as long as this is the motion and this is what happens in reality, they need to defend it or to expand in a better and more systematic way why they think that globally that's not the case. Also, we think that we think that coming back to CO that say something about feminism, we think that there are anarchism, feminist or eco-anarchism, but I think that there are small movements that it's not so interesting to talk about this small niche organization, and we think that even if they prove that this is also part of the debate and they have some impact, we just don't know why as part of the establishment you cannot make it more adjustable for women or for the environment and things like that. Why we need a revolution where we get some gradual change constantly. All right. The last thing we get from open opposition on this is they say that at the moment that Trump was elected, he's now part of the establishment. This is not how his people see that, because they say even when Trump was elected, he was constrained by the news media that is not Fox News, which was allegedly part of the establishment, by the judicial system and the Supreme Court that have banned some of the things that Trump wanted to do. We think that this is not how people receive that. Before I move on, I would like to take CO.
And I really don't understand what is the difference between saying the establishment is good but need to change, and saying the establishment is bad. I think that
Thank you. I just dedicated that 4 minutes. If the panel gets that, that's enough for me. So let's talk about dangers for democracy. Please note that democracy, it's not a binary whether you are a democracy or not. Everybody who was even once in the Freedom House of Democracy knows that it's a spectrum. For example, in Turkey you can vote, in Hungary you can vote, but they have gradual eradication of separation of powers and checks and balances. For example, by media censorship that now doesn't allow certain things against Erdogan or against Orban to be said. Or for example, when you take away the authority of the police to investigate a certain police investigations, like they try to do in Israel, the anti-establishment led by Benjamin Netanyahu. We think that why it happens when we have anti-establishment? Because basically you have a strong leader persona, for example, Trump, Orban, Erdogan, that say, look, there is a deep state that even if you elect, for example, moderate right-wing or moderate left-wing, essentially they are puppets of stronger forces, for example, the judicial system, for example, the police, for example, business owners, who think that this is what gets us to emergency politics. What is emergency politics? Is the idea that if you have emergency, if you have such a strong power that doesn't let you to keep on in a democratic way, you have to vote for a strong leader, and you need to give them superpowers. Well, how these superpowers looks like? For example, changing the constitution. For example, put some censorship in Turkey that doesn't allow people to criticize them a certain aspect of the Erdogan policies. We think that democracy is not just election; it's also like the power, for example, to have free speech in the news media or newspapers. Because if you cannot voice things against the leader, then probably who will get elected because only his narrative can be broadcasted. It's also like the ability of the judicial system and police to investigate and to get out corruption. Because if you have a lot of corruption, yes, maybe you can vote, but if you get the corrupt leaders over and over and you don't have any constraint, we think that that's how they steal money, that's how they get the country wars, and that's how we are actually losing tons of money that we could use for welfare or any other thing the state should do. So to summarize, we think that Trump and Orban that's the classic case for this debate, and they are really bad for multiple reasons, and therefore I'm happy to propose.
Thank the speaker for that speech. To conclude the opening half of this debate and extend its proposition, DLO, you're here.
Hello, I'm Ichiro. Please do POIs through voice, and then just do it once. Again, voice, and do it once, I'll call you. Okay. Three, two, one. The promise of a democracy is not that it will be perfect all the time, but when the going gets tough, when there are bad things that are happening, it has a mechanism to be able to fix itself through people that vote, through people that change the politicians that exist in status quo, the establishment. There are three ways opening opposition is going to win. The first thing is we're just going to fix what anti-establishment means, because we forecast a debate that's going to be messy about its definition. I do not think it's about conspiracy theories. The second thing is we're going to talk about democracy itself and what's the problem. Because OG posits that's about conspiracy theories, and we posit that it's about apathy and so on. We're going to weigh what is the biggest problem of democracy. When we answer that, we tackle OG at their best and we win it. The third thing we're going to do is we're going to say how this such specific types of discourse affects the voters and the politicians that exist in status quo. Firstly, is the anti-establishment encouraging conspiracy theories at the end of the day? Take note of the analysis of OG. They said conspiracy theories target dumb people, or that, for example, it is done with business interests. And take note, this specific analysis works even without the anti-establishment discourse. That means, on their own analysis, they did not characterize why anti-establishment discourse even leads to this in the first place. They cannot prove that. They cannot claim that impact in this debate. There is no such thing as a free lunch or a free impact in this debate. We think then that because of their analysis that is absent of this anti-establishment discourse, I think that just does not work at the end of the day. But even if we do accept and we're charitable, I think it may be a problem, but it is the solution to its own problem. Because the anti-establishment is about questioning the status quo, the dominant narrative that controls our politics, our ideals. You can make people believe that we need to challenge the dominant narratives. Then it just becomes an easier game to convince them of who's really in power in the first claim. It's easier for people to convince people that Trump and people like Mitch McConnell are the establishment, versus telling people not to be angry or not to be riled up in the first place. I think that solves its own problem, because at least it drives people to not necessarily be sheeps all the time at the end of the day. So what this means is OG's impact is minimal because they fail to mechanize what this discourse even does to its conspiracy theories at the end of the day. Secondly, then, what about the problem of a democracy? So what was the problem we posited to you? We told you that a democracy right now are all about the same faces, the same ideas, the same interests that are being propagated. And people do not have a way to fight back because some of us are not able to vote because we do not believe that our vote changes anything because the establishment is so powerful. Jill argues to you that this specific discourse empowers people to be able to run and to be able to believe that we must challenge status quo. So then, let's weigh this off. If their problem is about conspiracy theories, maybe anti-vaxxers and the like, the first thing to weigh here is which is a larger problem. The first thing I'm going to say is conspiracy theories are just minorities. To some extent, they may have stormed the Capitol, but they're not the vast majority of people. But what we tell you the vast majority of people are the vast majority of the youth, for example, that do not vote in the elections because they do not believe that they can challenge the establishment right now because this specific discourse doesn't rise. So on a weighing scale of people, I think the problem is larger in our scale. The second thing is, I think in terms of the purpose of a democracy isn't supposed to be afraid of these conspiracy theories. What a democracy should be afraid of is not being able to function itself, because it is just a mechanism to fix when things get rough, when things don't go the way it is. It replaces the politicians in place. But in status quo, in the establishment, you cannot replace them because it's the same amount of people, because it's the people that do not believe that they have the chance to do it at the end of the day. So even at the best case of OG, that it does rile up people, I think that is just a tiny, tiny problem compared to democracy itself not working, because that means the perpetuation of people in power continuously oppressing minorities, continuously dissatisfying its own citizens, and so on. CG, sure.
Yeah, so I don't really understand who will replace the current politician that you have in your side if your issue is always about replacing this politician.
That is not the burden of the debate. The burden of the debate is we must be able to convince people with this specific discourse that the current people must be replaced. I think that's like an easy way to say that Mitch McConnell is bad. We should replace him because he's been in power far too long. It does not have to be that complicated. And then we think what this means for the debate is, even if we accept OG at their best when unmechanized impacts, they still lose out in this debate. Now then, let's talk about Jill, because Jill talked about two main actors that are affected by this. Firstly, on voters. Voter apathy is really high right now. It is one of the largest threats to democracy when people do not believe in it anymore, because it is a tool that is only done when people actually exercise that right to vote and actually criticize and actually have the chance to go against. So that's the first thing. They did not respond to that on OG at all. That stands as a huge problem in their way. The second thing is, I think the current status quo politics has no new faces as much. It's still the same old people that have been there for so long. I think at the very least on our side, we're able to encourage newer faces to be able to rise up. Because if you want change and if you want to change the system, you are not able to change it when you believe you have no chance whatsoever, because the establishment controls anything. It's always about the Democrats and the Republicans. But when this discourse allows you to believe in yourself and other people to believe in you with the same ideals that the same people shouldn't be in the power again, I think that's what empowers people, that's what encourages people, and that problem continues to perpetuate in OG the longer and longer these people stay in power, because they can create more laws, because they can market themselves for far longer. That is a self-perpetuating problem that only grows larger as we speak. The third thing is, I think most politicians right now are too chummy with the corporations like media, like, for example, bad specific organizations like the NRA. I think a key part of the anti-establishment narrative is for you to be able to say weed out the politicians that are being controlled by business interests and the like. At the very least, when this becomes mainstream, when the rise has reached its peak, I think politicians are likely to stray away from this. Yes, we may not entirely remove NRA Republicans, but we make it damn sure that they think twice whether they represent, for example, business interests that exist right now. They think twice whether they would represent these specific companies at the end of the day. At the end of this debate, it's about democracy for the team that does it.
Thank the speaker for that speech. To now open the back of the debate, member of government here.
Hi, am I clearly audible?
Yes, you are.
Wonderful. Okay, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. We're going to uniquely explain how anti-establishment discourse mitigates the harms of the establishment by deterring their behavior. But before that, we're going to conclude to determine the clash in top half of whether we're talking about right-wing or left-wing anti-establishmentarianism, and explain why the bottom line from that is that we're acknowledging and validating the life experiences of those most harmed, increasing the knowledge and access of people to injustices, and therefore making society better. So let's start with what is establishment and what is anti to establishment. So first, the establishment is the corporate class, the top 1%. So anti is the 99% movement. Second, it's white law enforcement, white cops, white judges, white lawmakers. So the anti to that is the Black Lives Matter movement. It's big political parties who hold more power than their voters do because of gerrymandering and because of campaign finance. It looks like the patriarchy, number 4. The fact that presidents like Clinton and executives like Weinstein and billionaires like Epstein can, do whatever they want. So anti is Me Too movement. It looks like big oil and big shipping and big logging corporations. So the anti to that is eco movements. In any place where the establishment, people who have power, have different interests than the people, the majority, that is anti-establishmentarianism. What OG described is anti-disestablishmentarianism, which is just something I've always wanted to say in a debate, because they're telling us that because the narrative on the right is that the establishment is being taken over. Obama's a Muslim, he's an American. Me Too and Black Lives Matter are trying to change our way of life, right? The MAGA movement, Make America Great Again, wants to return to the past. We are talking about anti-establishmentarianism, which is inherently anti-conservative. It recognizes that the establishment benefits whoever is currently in power, whoever wrote the system, whoever exploited it early on, generational wealth based on exploitation of slaves, systems like the Electoral College or the aldermen of the City of London who maintain power undemocratically. On our side, the left acknowledges the historic source of power within the establishments. So while conservatives want to maintain it and prevent progress, the left want to progress past it and change the establishment. The bottom line is that OG's population support the establishment of 40 years ago. They're not anti-establishment, they are reactionary to change. Our second bottom line is that the anti-establishmentarianism movement inherently acknowledges the life experiences of those harmed by the establishment. What are the impacts of the rise in understanding that we get under the motion? First, knowledge and awareness. The questions of police abuse or wealth inequality have always been problems. What changes how informed is the average citizen? How proximate are they? Allies. Once they hear stories, coverage, speak to their friends, join a protest, meet the direct victims of the establishment, they become more activist, more involved, they vote better, and they do their best not to participate in the harms. Many of them end up inside the establishment as politicians or lawyers or the corporate world and have anti-establishment sentiment and awareness, so try to change it from within. But secondly, we get validation. We validate the disenfranchised because we're just acknowledging at a broad level and at a rising level their struggles. They're being seen. Protests happen more often and have more people. There's more allies, which means that a minority that feels abandoned by the government, abandoned by the establishment, and discriminated against for centuries are no longer being abandoned by their fellow citizens. Socially, morally, people are still fighting for them. This fights against their apathy. This gives them hope for change and the strength to keep fighting. But even without that, we mitigate the harms by deterring. Let's explain. What is the problem in the status quo that we need to deter against? The establishment has the means, opportunity, and motives to pass laws and regulations, helping themselves and their friends directly or indirectly. This looks like salaries and employment conditions. Politicians are the only people whose boss is the people, but who get to set their own job conditions, their own salaries and vacation times. It looks like campaign laws. What donations are you allowed to receive? What gerrymandering can you do? Which looks like tit for tat power relations elections between the rich and the elected, and it also looks like the people not being able to hold their politicians to account because they cannot replace them in elections. It looks like polarizing questions like police reform or like positive discrimination and acceptance to universities, questions that someone like Biden, who wants to receive 51% of the vote, would rather just not discuss at all. It looks like dealing with specific unjust mechanisms that maintain power, like a business council that has the ear of the president, like sheriffs who enforce laws without being accountable to anyone and running unopposed in elections, like the electoral college who allows a minority to keep controlling the majority of the country. Before I explain how we create deterrence, I'll take opening.
When Trump says that the 2020 election were rigged by the election and therefore we should storm the Capitol, he's by definition anti-establishment. The fact that he wants some liberal policies doesn't make them anti-establishment.
The president cannot be anti-establishment, and my partner will answer more if she thinks it's required. So mechanisms for deterrence. First, we have direct criticism of specific laws and people created by the establishment for the establishment. This looks like eminent domain, which allows law enforcement to steal, which they only need to justify the local court system who get part of the spoils. Note, under Obama, this was changed and Trump changed it back, benefiting the establishment. It looks like increases to salaries of the establishment. It looks like limitations of the media. It looks like what power we are taking away from politicians. It's also criticizing of specific politicians and actor. We have now sources like PolitiFact who talk about here, the establishment don't just lie, it's not in your minds, they actively lie, and here are the statistics of how much they lie. It looks like Twitter discussions where any pundit can say what they think and can hold politicians to account, and if enough people retweet them, mainstream media reports on it as well. As a result, we have a competition, a free marketplace of ideas, because we get to bring up unpopular ideas and over time turn them popular. This looks like Bernie Sanders, who after 30 years of fighting for anti-establishment policies, had AOC and similar politicians finally getting elected, some state legislators being fully controlled by anti-establishment groups who are actively changing the balance of power, who are legalizing abortions and giving women the right to control their body instead of the patriarchy, who are increasing community policing and giving communities the strength to police themselves. We're looking at a change of the Overton window, because when we repeat these ideas long enough and people get exposed to them, they get over their emotional barriers, over their status quo bias, and start supporting these ideas because they are morally more just. Specifically, the rise gives hope because we appeal to younger folk who are suffering from apathy, who think that the system has always been like this. And we're telling them, no, the cultural zeitgeist is with you. You are the ones who can make the change. And the rise is a feedback loop that leads to additional rise. And for all of these reasons, go with closing opposition.
I thank the speaker for that speech. To close case suicide government whip. Here. for that speech. Conclude case for side opposition and this debate. Op-ed here. Op-ed.
Okay, am I audible, visible, all that?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. I've been having internet issues all day. So if at any point I become a bit unclear, a bit lagging off, please write in the chat and I can just switch to my phone. Sometimes it works better. Also, please don't turn on cameras or I will maybe turn off my camera if you write it. Anything, POIs please in the chat. You can offer this one time. I promise I say, I promise I take. Okay. So I'm going to begin in 3, 2, 1. Two things. First, characterization battle, why we need. Secondly, why we need specifically the rise answering CG. I really don't understand what is the difference between saying that the establishment is okay, but we need to change
sorry,
politics,
you are really
which
cutting
CG
out. Maybe you want to switch off your camera and start again. You're on mute now. So.
Sorry, I'm switching to my phone.
Yeah, no problem.
It wouldn't happen, but let's hope it works better.
I also just think it's better if you switch off your camera in case that's causing trouble.
Yeah, I will. Okay. How is it now? Is it better?
Yeah, it's much better.
Okay, I switched to like my cellular data instead of the Wi-Fi. And I have another phone here. So if this phone doesn't work as well, tell me again and I switch to the second phone. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll keep the camera off. Okay. Hope it works. So I'm just restarting, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna restart in 3, 2, 1. Let's begin with the characterization battle. I seriously don't understand what is the difference between saying the establishment is good but need to change specific things, or we say we need to change complete establishment. I think the characterization that says, well, it's extreme movements that aren't willing to accept any sort of corporation who demonize the establishment is, well, extreme. I do accept this exists on some level. I do accept there are extreme right wing and extreme left wing that say we should never talk to the establishment. They are always bad. We should just oppose them. We only care about throwing them out. I just don't think they're the likely case of the majority in the debate. Let's give several reasons. First, by definition, being anti-setting does not mean I cannot cooperate with it. I can be anti-OG and still take their PY because it's the best way to beat them, to engage with them. Secondly, people have the interest to have concession and changing because then they get public awareness, then they get public happiness, voters voting for them. Social movements want to have concrete benefits. So they have, the only way is by cooperating, so therefore they have an incentive. Thirdly, when I see something as negative, it's much more like good for me to get something from him, to get a concession, to get an achievement. So even if I demonize them, I still want to get something for them, so there is a benefit for me. Fourthly, every serious political candidate or any serious participant in our political life has to cooperate. Why? Because someday they want to be the establishment. If I want to be elected as senator, as mayor, as judge, as policeman, as social worker, as someone who works for the government, there is a limit to how much I can do from the sidelines. So there is no interest to completely demonize, but always to say it with some stuff. Like you say, I can say the most are good. There are a lot of, but there are many bad apples. Because otherwise, when I get elected, how am I justifying not firing all of the policemen, all of the officers, if I rule one time of day? This already answers a lot of OG. Firstly, about cooperation. Secondly, about the interest to spread conspiracy theories that say the establishment is worse. Like, already answered about the conservatives and Trump, but let's give two additional reasons. Firstly, I think Trump he is part of the establishment, and more important, he aspires to go back to the establishment. He started criticizing it only after he's losing, and even then, he is very careful not to criticize the whole establishment because he wants to be there someday. And like I said, he cannot fire everyone. Secondly, if he cannot fire the establishment, he can just criticize something else. The left people, the minorities, Obama, everything they already talks to you about. Therefore, you cannot get all of their impact that come from the Trump and right-wing people as exclusive to this rise. I think there would happen either way, better response than OO, and also characterization better, we beat it. Okay, now let's begin with CG. Why we need the rise? They say in CG, well, they still always symmetrically, we characterize bad policy. Why do we need specifically anti-establishment? All that it does is propaganda and irrational rage. And here we beat OO and frankly love the debate because we take the brave sense of the debate. We sacrifice something. We explain that yes, in a lot of cases, in many cases, there is specific inherent danger in the establishment, which is based on their character of the establishment, which justifies direct criticism of the establishment. Even if sometimes we cooperate a bit less, even if some people are angry, we explain why it's a good thing and why it is justified. And here we answer CG that says that, well, there is the establishment is good, there is just bad apples, which are already criticized enough. He explains why not. What reasons does he give? First, he talks to you about political interest. They have an interest to continue to preserve their power now and therefore to make the playing game unequal. Secondly, they have a financial interest. They have earned from biases their whole life. If I am white man, I have earned from slavery. If I have had money for that, I have earned from chauvinism. I have earned from how the society is structured. I have earned from Ivy Leagues accepting the children of donors. I have earned from all of those structures. And I have the financial interest to want to preserve this power structure because they benefit my children and my friends and my immediate social environment. Thirdly, they have a social interest, their pride. Right now, they represent the country. It's shameful to admit actively that the establishment was bad, that the police was brutalizing, that we have aided and abetted and policies that hurt women. It's really hard to admit that I was wrong. Very relevant with the history of all of the establishment. Fourthly, comfort. All of the establishment symmetrically enjoys the thing that I described to you. A lot of getting more money at my paycheck, less public criticism, less money, less power for media, social criticism. The left enjoyed and the right enjoyed. And Eyal analyzed why it changed. Why it is important? Because here we do something, why we choose this extension. OO comes and says, well, tomorrow there will be different candidates, which is good. Today it's always the same people, but tomorrow we have better candidates and less social apathy. CG comes and says, well, how do you know it's going to be better candidates? Well, we don't have to answer CG on that because we don't say we are going to replace everyone. I think it's unrealistic. We show to you social change in a much more realist way. Before I explain how, CG.
If there is no alternative that you can answer or who replaced the current government or who will change anything, how then you ensure your change will be good?
Okay, I think that any alternative will be flawed. I agree. This is why the movement needs to happen all of the time. All of the time, I want the media at their doors. Show me your paycheck. Show me the recording. Show me your diary. Show me who are you meeting with. I want all of the time. They're checking and checking and checking. And this movement is always criticizing them because once they become part of the session, I have those interests at some level. We don't think it's likely they will say, oh, we need to throw them up. It's likely it's criticism on it, which is a good thing no matter who is elected. Okay, so why do we get those things? Eyal tells you three things. Firstly, it just validates them. This is experiential why we need the rise. It says the establishment is the people who are in power, meaning the marginal groups are not there. So any discourse that says, well, people have suffered because they are not part of the establishment, and the establishment did something bad, validates them. Eyal says, tell you why it creates a sense of fixing those harms. We think validation is a positive impact for all groups of population. Yes, also right-wing farmers in the south of the US, we think they've also been hurt by the establishment. In some way, it's good to validate their feeling and make them feeling they're not alone. Eyal actually give you the mechanisms for hope and not just say hope like oh. In addition, he explains you Deterrence. He gives you several structural reasons. He tells you, firstly, they are more scared by being criticized because there is significant movement. It means I am less likely to increase my paycheck. I am less likely when I am part of the academia and when I am in Yale and Harvard to accept many sons and daughters of my graduates, and are more likely to have positive policies of accepting minorities because I know they are checking me. Secondly, I talk to you about how ideas go to the surface. They will tell you, well, there are models, but Riel explains literally the process about how it starts in the margins, and then some politicians adopt it because they want those voters about AOC and about Sanders. So because we don't claim any huge stuff that are unrealistic, replacing everyone, killing everyone, we say something simple. The assessment is that crimes and harm things, and we mitigate it by creating different narratives and changes. Benefits for CO, easy call. Thank you.
Thank the speaker for that speech. Thank you to all four teams for that debate. You can now leave the breakout room, and all the best for the results.
Thank you.